where people can, set up a call center and target the citizens in the US, citizens in the UK to part away with their money, calling as if they are from the IRS, the tax department of the US, the tax department of the UK. So these scams are becoming very popular, and now they are happening as they are being run as small scale industries. And we are certain that this is not going to stop now. These incidents are going to grow, and India will soon be a hub for many social engineering or cybercrime activities, right? So smishing is something which is very popular today, which is happening. It's a phishing which happens through either SMS messages or social media messages like WhatsApp. Most of us would have received some messages saying that that the government is giving some aid during the pandemic. There is a vaccine registration process that you need to do online, and they convince us to click on some information or part away with some information. That is phishing. And phishing and smishing are very, very easy to achieve because they run like wholesale businesses where you send messages in thousands or millions, and 3 to 4% of the people fall prey for that. That's how they work. For them, 3 to 4% matters a lot, and it takes care of return on investment. Like all the professionals today, fraudsters also work on return on investment concept. Their investment has to be highly rewarding. So when they invest to send social media messages, it costs them money. And smishing is one of the easiest and cost-effective form for them to conduct a fraud. So spearfishing is something which is very high, targeted phishing, where the modus operandi is or the messages are tailored to attack one particular individual or one particular entity. This is becoming quite popular these days. We would have seen recently there was a Twitter scam that happened where many celebrities' information, including the Twitter founder, including the Barack Obama's Twitter account, all got phished. It got social engineered. So what happened was there were two aspects of it which was involved. One is spearfishing was one of the one of the modus operandi, and the second one was the SIM swap. So spearfishing is highly effective because they go after only one or a group of people or a particular organization. So whaling and CEO fraud is something which has been there for some time. So whaling is again something which the word whale means something large. So whaling happens when they go after a particular target, right? Some CEOs of the companies, the board members of the companies, or high-ranking government official to gain the access to their accounts and spoof them. And this is becoming a concern these days because there are a lot of social media influencers who are online, who keep posting their information online, who keep posting what they do. Today, everything is available in the form of data. What we eat, when we wake up, what we wear, who we meet, how much money you have, everything is available in the form of data. There is no more privacy involved in the digital age. And that's the advantage for people to go after, big fish. And that's precisely what whaling is all about. Impersonation can, be in several forms. It can be through an ID theft. It can be in any other form, but it's something where a person pretends to be someone else with the goal of obtaining some access to a particular system or information. The most common impersonation scams today is called SIM swap, which is becoming another large industry targeting mainly the US, the UK's, the EU, and India. There are so many SIM swap frauds that has been detected, and the SIM swap fraud is highly dangerous because they take control of your whole banking accounts by swapping the SIM, by swapping the mobile, which is the key aspect today for all of us who do banking. We depend on mobile. Depending on mobile is highly efficient, highly convenient, and highly risky because the security aspect of this mobile banking or digital banking is not being taken care of, adequately by the financial institutions. So it's becoming a large-scale incident. There are several of thousands of syndicates coming up from the Eastern European countries like Ukraine, like in Latvia, and they are targeting the Western market. And India is becoming very popular with this. And every now and then we keep hearing in the news about SIM swap frauds. Now, all the law enforcement agencies in the world have put SIM swap fraud as one of the biggest threat. Just to give a small, number, only from a country like UK, the losses are 10 million pounds every year in the recent year, which is 100 crores of Indian rupees. That number is quite staggering. And according to FBI, it's increasing at almost 240% in the US. Next slide, Vijay. So BEC, business email compromise, is another form of fraud which is prevalent. It's been there in the market for almost 10 to 15 years now, but it's gaining momentum because it goes after corporates. So every professional today who is working in a corporate has to be concerned about this because it impacts the bottom line of their company. Whether you are in banking, whether you are a supplier, whether you are a technology company, whether you are a manufacturing company, you become a target of BEC fraud, and eventually it hits the bottom line, meaning it hits our income, our livelihood. So what is business email compromise? The fraudsters, they exploit the logistic process, communication between two organizations. So say, for example, there is a company which procures laptops from a vendor, right? The vendor can be in India or it can be in another part of the world. So they intercept the communication between this corporate and the supplier, and they try to replicate the supplier's email or spoof the supplier's email address or domain address, and making the corporate to believe that the request of payment is coming from legitimate source, and they channel the money to a new account and swindle the money. They siphon off with the money, right? So for example, there are some examples which are given here. So what people do is try to replicate the domain address or the name of the entities in their web domain or the email address itself. If you look at here, the 0 and O, there are very few people who are non-information security professionals or anti-fraud professional or a financial crime professional who can detect this. And in a day-to-day sense, it's even difficult for us professionals to distinguish between two different types of a genuine and a fraudulent domain or an email address. I've been working in this field for almost 2 decades, and at times I get surprised with the kind of sophistication that happens. right? So usually what they do, they use some techniques like typo squatted domains or homograph spoofing attacks. A homograph attack is usually they use the Unicode URL to spoof a website URL to make it look like the genuine one. For instance, here you can see the Microsoft, which if you can move the cursor to the word Microsoft there. I don't know if all of us in the first look, we were able to see if it's not Microsoft, it's RNICROSOFT. It's not M, it's R and N, right? So they trick people with a small change, which people do not see that at all. It's a very smart way of doing it. It's not very sophisticated for us because it's something new, something it's advanced. We have not seen this. It looks sophisticated, but it's very fundamental how they trick you. So to prove this theory, there are some researchers from Israel who worked to see how this fraud happens. They were successful in registering a domain in the name of Microsoft using a different font characters. So they were able to register. Initially, everything had to be recorded in one particular, there were standards to it. Now, because internet is reaching different parts of the world and people who are non-English speakers are also part of this, there are a lot of characters from different scripts or different languages are currently being used to support the domain process and the internet usage. That has given opportunity and room for fraudsters to commit some kind of frauds. And these frauds are called as homograph fraud. Let's move to the next page, Vijay. Let's spot the difference between the first website address and the second one. So can anyone tell the difference? Second one is fake. Rajneesh says second one is fake. So how, Rajneesh, what is fake there? If you can help us understand. Exactly. Rajneesh, well done. I mean, Rajneesh was able to detect and tell us what it is. Vijay, to the next page. Excellent, Rajneesh. Excellent. So the difference is the first domain address was with the character L, which is PayPal. The second one was I, used in the capital form, right? So it's PayPal. So initially the domains were using a different font, which made two characters look similar to each other. Since 2001, Windows have changed that to a form Tahoma so that people are easily able to differentiate. Now, how many of us who are not a cybersecurity professional, not an anti-fraud professional, will be able to detect this? For a naked eye on a day-to-day basis, when we are busy, even these things get slipped out of our, just underneath us, and it just slips away, right? Now, these scams have resurfaced time and again. Even in 2020, many people were able to see this kind of, scams coming up every now and then. Yes, Vijay. Some examples I've given where, an Acme insurance company domain address has been hacked. Equifax, for example, is the one I is missing here. There is a difference between some examples of the real domain name and the typo squat domain examples, right? Now, this is very Google doesn't make difference, but there are people who still fall prey for it. Victoria's Secret is the real website domain, but what has been used here is Victoria's Secret. Home Depot has become Home Depot, right? A railroad, they just added one more L to it. So it's very simple to do any kind of hacking today. Next one, Vijay. And when it comes to other smishing frauds, we all would have seen this. Many would have received, or somebody would have forwarded to us, or some it would have been reported in social media. People are using pandemic as what pandemic has motivated the fraudsters, I would say. The digital fraud numbers have gone in a different proportion. Pandemic has increased the digital penetration globally. However, the frauds or social engineering frauds in particular that's happening during pandemic is in several multiples of the proportion that digital fraud has happened. So these are some of the examples. UAE has been one of the markets where people still believe in each other. People still trust to an extent. Sometimes you'll be surprised when you go as a banker and meet the relationship managers in several banks. When they go meet a customer, the customer will hand them a bag of money and say, "Can you deposit in my account?" Without any questions, without any proof. After several years of trainings, now the bankers have to, convince the customer not to give them money, but the tradition is still there because the people still believe others, saying that, okay, this person is representing an institution, a bank, an organization. He or she will not trick us, will not cheat us. That's one of the the naivety, you can say, but also that's the where fraudsters take advantage of it. So we have seen several frauds coming up in the UAE market. There are times we have seen people in the law enforcement, very, very senior law enforcement officers, falling prey to social engineering scams. Some of them have lost their money, and fortunately, the money was returned to them because timely action was taken on the beneficiary institution, and the money was blocked and returned to them. So touch any channel today. Today's everything is online. So the chances of falling prey to frauds is very easy. You get a message today saying that, okay, you're using Vodafone or Geo. If you today we have a say an offer for 5 rupees, we're giving 10 GB, 10 whatever, right? So people fall prey. Just click this link and you will be able to do it. People fall prey for it. 95%, 96% of them will not, but 4 to 5% are those vulnerable people who can either be ignorant of what's happening around, or the busyness makes them overlook certain aspects of it. So these things do crop up time to time, and that is becoming the biggest threat. One of the most advanced market today, the UK market, is suffering from social engineering frauds big time. From the dollar value and from the number of incidents, they are being impacted big time because of the digital penetration and pandemic and the push of banks towards digital banking before preparing their customers to be digitally aware. Yes, Vijay. Some more examples here. This is again in the US and also in other parts of the globe. This is becoming a problem where you get a message that your shipment from Flipkart or Amazon or courier company has not been delivered to you. It says click and give the information. Either malicious software gets installed, or you part away with the information. COVID vaccine frauds became quite popular everywhere, including India. Now, after awareness from the public and health authorities, from the government and the health authorities, that has come down drastically. So, yes, Vijay. So how big is this problem? We're talking 4%, but how big is the problem? Cyber fraud, the cybercrime damages in another 4 years' time are anticipated to be $10.5 trillion. Compare that to our economy. Compare that to the economy of any country in the world. It's a staggering number. It's just unbelievable number. So how much of this is social engineering? Because we are saying total cyber crime. So how much of this is social engineering? If you come back to the last one, the 98% what we say is 98% of the cyber attacks involve social engineering. So 98% of 10.5 trillion is around 10 trillion. That's huge. During pandemic, the cyber crime incidence has gone up by 600%. And 220% increase in the phishing or social engineering incidents alone. Now, 82% of the banks globally, they believe that there is high level of sophistication now when it comes to cyber frauds. And 86% of our breaches are financially motivated. So Kaspersky and another company, they came up with some research. What they believe, Verizon, I'm sorry about it, not Kaspersky, Verizon, they came up with a report where they said that only 3% of the hackers, they try to penetrate or a system through breaching the firewalls. When I say firewalls, for some kind of sophisticated. Rest 97%, they just rely on social engineering to hack into an organization or an enterprise to steal the data. 97 on social engineering. So the online fraud attacks have gone up by 250 million. Why these many frauds are happening? There are several reasons to it. The most important reason that I would say today is because of passwords. As we speak today, there are 300 billion passwords in use globally, which is 40 passwords for every living human being on the planet. Most of us, including cybersecurity specialists, including financial crime specialists and anti-fraud specialists, we recycle the passwords. You have banking, you have a password. In banking, even if you have one credit card, you need to have a PIN for that. You need to have internet banking password for it. You need to have a mobile banking PIN for it. You need to have a telephone banking PIN for it. So even for one account, you need 4 to 5 pins, ATM PIN, right? So you have Netflix, you have Amazon Prime, you need passwords. You have an online account with Flipkart, you need password. You need to recharge your phone, you need password. So we are so password hungry that this gives room for people to exploit us. And that's where the real problem is. That's where the organizations have to address this problem to eliminate passwords. We will see that in the next slides. So what are the India-centric numbers? Last year, India conducted 11 billion transactions. Another 4 years, the anticipated growth of digital payment is going to be $250 billion. It's a very, very high number. So why I'm talking about these numbers is because social engineering frauds exploit digital banking. They prey on digital customers, whether it's millennials, whether it's old people, whether it's professionals. They prey on them, and we believe millennials are smart, but they also fall prey for it. Today, the corporate world or the consumer world is driven with greed, right? We say, okay, you buy now, you get 20% discount. You buy this, you get a free voucher. You buy this, you get something. And every time we see the word free or discount, it attracts our attention. We all of us, we look for discounts, we look for prices, and the fraudsters exploit that. And we can't blame the people because people didn't want digital banking. It's the banks who put the customers on the digital platform. And it was not, slow and consistent growth. It was a hyper growth. What our generation has seen, perhaps, the next generation or the past generation has not seen to that extent the advancement of technology, right? From not having a telephone to the most, to Apple Watch is an advancement that we have seen, and the next generation are not able to cope up with the differences, not able to cope up with what's happening. So the same way in the banking, going to the bank and writing a voucher or a check to withdraw the money to the click of a button, right? So this fast growth in India, say in last 15 years, that the digital transformation and growth that has seen, people, not all of us are able to catch up with that growth. And that's where the problem is. Most of the professionals like us, I would say we form only 4 to 5% who are able to adopt fully. Rest of us are either in the adaptation process or we use technology despite we are not fond of technology. And that's the problem that also reflects on the digital banking. Whenever there is a digital payment, digital banking infrastructure, you have so many, payment aggregators coming out every single year, right? To understand each of them, to remember each form of banking. There is no universal banking today. There's no universal form of, conducting a transaction. Paytm is different. PayPal is different. Your bank is different. You have the UPI payment, so many other, thousands of options there. They are different. So somebody is using a QR code, somebody is using an OTP, somebody is using, passwords and PIN. So everything confuses our brain into believing in something which we don't see. And that's the real problem. We don't look at this as a psychological problem, but if the solution providers, if the banks understand this aspect of it, they will be in a better position to address the digital problem with their clients, with their consumers, from a long-term perspective. And I think that's where people, most of these professionals, they miss out. They don't anticipate the customer expectation. They don't see what the customer, they don't put themselves in the customer's shoe. Although they also use banking application, they don't put themselves in the customer's shoe from a long-term perspective to address this point. Coming back to the numbers, in India, there is a 82% of spike. Sorry, I think I missed on a few more. According to the media, last year, in the last 12 months, 27 million people, adults in India, have fallen victim to identity theft frauds. So there's a big number. 68% of the consumer now want to use digital platforms for payments. Now that is going to increase by 71% in the next 4 years. During COVID, 82% spike in the phishing email was seen, and 300% increases in cyber attack, according to CERT India. And cybercrime losses last year in 2019, was $17 billion. $17 billion. It's a huge, huge number for a country and economy like India. It's a huge economy. The volume-wise, it's big, but that impacts the bottom line of the organization, means it impacts the consumer. Every time a corporate gets impacted, they don't take the burden, they pass the burden. So if your prices or your interest rates, or if your product price rates are going up, is because of the money that's lost to frauds, operational risk, and many other aspects of an organization functioning. The moment the operating cost of any organization is low, it gets passed on back to the economy. And as consumers, we all benefit. So 82% of the consumers are concerned about their online banking. These are the India numbers. Some of the advisories in the next slide, Vijay. Right from Interpol to National Crime Center of the UK to Europol to FBI, name any global law enforcement agency, they are concerned about cyber crimes and social engineering frauds today. Next slide, we'll talk about the India-specific numbers, where RBI has time and again been warning people on frauds and social engineering frauds, and not to share the OTPs and PINs, including what HDFC came with Muh Band Rakho campaign, right? So everyone, right from Paytm to everyone, is coming with a threat, and this is going to increase until there is a drastic shift in the way we perform transaction, because India is going to reach 15 trillion worth of transaction by 2025. 15 trillion rupees per day. That's what we are heading towards. Next slide, Vijay. A security system is only as strong as its weakest link. And when it comes to cyber frauds, the weakest link has always been people. Like I said, bankers do not, or organizations do not look this from a evolution point of view, digital evolution. If they see the digital evolution, that if you focus on that, you will be able to address the problems largely. See, we as human beings, we didn't start driving a Honda or a big cars today from the day one, right? We evolved slowly. We, from a child, you start crawling, you start walking, you start use bicycle, motorcycle, small car, big car, and then luxury cars. The growth has to be slow and consistent. Whenever there is a hyper growth, there will be some repercussions to it. There will be some it's kind of a domino effect that takes place, right? The wheel goes up, there is a problem, the wheel will come down slowly, because the speed it goes, the speed it has to come down. And that's when the frauds and other things will happen. So if it goes up slowly, then the chances of it coming down slowly, it's also possible. So let's understand a little more about the modus operandi of knowledge-based frauds. I will talk to you about what knowledge-based fraud is. So in a social engineering fraud, there are 4 elements of it. One is the information gathering stage, where somebody gets your information from social media messages or some groups and online, get some information. Then they contact you as they are representing an institution, organization, whatever, and they try to convince you into gathering more data. So they build a relationship, and many of them are successful in building this relationship. The moment that happens, they exploit you by convincing you to divulge some confidential information. Here, since we're talking about banks, it's usually your login credentials and PINs and OTPs, etc. And then they conduct the transaction on behalf of you, on your behalf, impersonating you, and the money gets siphoned off. So today, most of the banking across the globe, they authenticate their customers using knowledge factor, what we call as knowledge factor. What is knowledge factor? Anything which can be seen and which can be read, whether it's username, password, whether it's PINs, whether it's OTPs or authentication codes, or like banks like Axis and ICICI, they have that a table behind their debit card or credit card where you use a different combination, or even a RSA token. All these are knowledge factors, authentication. It's knowledge factor. Even QR code is a knowledge factor, because QR code is something, or a barcode is something you cannot interpret, but a machine can interpret. The moment the fraudster gets hold of that, they can easily, interpret that. They can translate that into a readable way, or they can use it with the technology and exploit you. So 98% of the banks globally, they depend on knowledge factor for authentication and transaction validation, right? So financial institution, what they do is they don't see that the human element risk is prevalent in knowledge factors, because you pass certain knowledge to your customers. You expect the customers to hold that knowledge and use that knowledge for authentication every time you conduct a transaction. That risk, the human element risk, makes the whole process very vulnerable. That's something which banks have to move away from. Next slide, Vijay. So what are the challenges for the banks today? 15, 20 years ago, when we talk about banking, KYC is a word, know your customer word, is popular, right? It was becoming popular for various reasons. The bank said, okay, you walk into the branch, show me your identity card. I will compare your identity card with your face. And if it matches, I will say, okay, it's you. And whether the identity card looked fairly genuine or not, that mattered. Today in the digital world, how are they knowing their customers? We don't know. There's a saying, on internet, nobody knows you're a dog. People don't know who is behind that device, who is behind that IP. Until they don't know their user, they will not be in a position to address the fraud problem. Today, banks are ignorant about their users. Most of the banks across the globe are ignorant about the users. Like I said, the next challenge is the neglecting the human aspect of security. You cannot stop a customer from performing some action. You cannot stop a customer from clicking a link or falling prey for a social engineering call and divulging the information, or merely passing the information to someone else. How many of us share a PIN, an OTP with our family, with our friends? I think most of us do. Even though, some of us will be bankers, some of us will be security professional. In our corporate life, we tell people, oh, your customer did this, let's not refund the money. Customer is not supposed to share the information, even to his family. Legally, customer is not supposed to do that. In the corporate life, we have a different approach. In the personal life, we have a different approach, right? So the banks, they cannot stop a customer from compromising this information. That risk, human element risk, is there. Inability to differentiate. Banks, like I said, they cannot differentiate between a genuine customer and a fraudster in the digital world because they don't know who is behind it. So what banks do is usually they try to add multiple layers of security in the digital platforms, whether it's internet banking, whether it's mobile banking. They add so many layers, it becomes impractical. It causes inconvenience to the user. Or what they do, they reduce the risk and say, okay, we want to give convenience to the customers. We are not worried about security so much. Eventually, if the customer loses money, it's his or her problem, because legally there are terms and conditions which says do not share the information. Customer shared, so the liability is on the customer. The buck gets passed on to the customer. So banks have been successful in doing this thus far. However, there is a liability shift that's happening. We have witnessed several cases in Ireland, in the UK, in Europe, in the UAE, where the banks have been asked to compensate the victim customers. And it's also coming to India soon, where the banks have been asked to compensate to a customer in the event of any fraud, because the judicial authorities and the regulators believe that Customers did not want digital banking. You shoved it on the customer. You told the customer, okay, you come and walk in and make a transaction, right? You have to stand in the queue for 5 hours, 2 hours, or half an hour, whatever. Or there is many countries have even started charging customers, a small percentage of money, $10 or $50 or 100 rupees or whatever for walk-in transaction and check transactions than internet transactions, right? Online transactions are free, but however, the walk-in transaction are being charged. That is shifting now because regulators are saying it's your problem, banks. It's not the problem of the consumers anymore. You make profits out of digital banking by reducing the cost of the branches and so on. Now it's time for you to adopt to better technologies to give the required security to the consumers. All right. It's again a wholesale, like a volume game. You make millions, right? You make hundreds of millions of dollars as profit. If 2% of your customer or 1% of your customer gets impacted, say it's 2 million or 5 million or 10 million, that is a very very small portion of it. So you pay the customers. That's where the liability shift is happening today. And we are going to witness this soon across many jurisdictions globally. Next challenge is the OTP risk. Till date, like I said, you want to send the money to your family or friends, add them as beneficiary. Adding beneficiary is OTP. Sending money is OTP. Everything is OTP dependent. Regulators are now telling the banks to move away from OTP to a more secure authentication process. The OTP is highly prone to frauds. In fact, with certain conversation that I had with everyone, so not everyone, certain conversations that I had with some people in India and in other parts of the globe, the bankers, sometimes they misinterpret the guidelines from the regulators. I'll give an example. In India, RBI has mandated banks to use alternative factor authentication. And they said, similar to OTP, similar to something else. However, bankers, the way they interpret is like alternative factor means OTP. So that's why many banks are still dependent on OTP. Surprisingly, Amex got it right, and they got it right recently, Amex India, and they have decided to move away from OTP to a soft code generator. So they have an app which generates a soft code, which is again knowledge factor. It's not something which is highly secure, but it at least reduces the MI man in the middle attack or certain other forms of frauds, right? So people misinterpret that, and India has to move away from OTP. India is going to be the largest digital economy in the world, largest digital banking economy in the world. And sooner than later, Reliance Jio Payment Bank will be one of the largest digital bank in the world. And Financial was, anticipated to be the largest financial, digital financial institution. However, Jack Ma doesn't have the support of the Chinese government. Here, the Indian government supports the digital banks here in India. And Jio, which is well equipped today with data of 650 million customers from Jio mobile service platform, is now going to become the largest digital bank in the world. And that's the reason you have seen right from Microsoft to Facebook and everybody start pumping in money in Jio, right? So if India does not gear up to an alternative authentication mechanism, you will see a surge in the cyber fraud, social engineering frauds. The last challenge for the bank is you do not have adequate, you do not have good solutions in the market, in the industry, to give some alternate to these social engineering fraud from a holistic perspective. There are bits and pieces of frauds that gets addressed, but holistically to address cyber crimes or social engineering fraud is still a challenge. And one of the reasons why that happens is, if you look at most of the service providers, globally speaking, you have technologists trying to build a banking solution or an anti-fraud solution or a compliance solution. But they do not have domain experts who are anti-fraud professionals, AML professionals, or cybersecurity professionals who can fix that gap, to bridge that gap, to help the technology companies to think from a cybersecurity perspective or anti-fraud perspective. Most of the solutions are customer-centric. It's very, very important to be customer-centric. However, it also has to be security-centric. A perfect combination or a recipe of security, a well-balanced recipe of security and customer experience matters a lot. And that is the way forward that is going to fix the problem. If banks are not able to address this, or technology companies are not able to address it, we will still continue to have these problems. So next word, Vijay. So we spoke about Frank, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Catch Me If You Can. One of his quotes was, cybersecurity will always be an issue until we get rid of passwords. So I'm not sure how many of us are familiar with FIDO Alliance, FIDO, Faster Identity Online Alliance. FIDO is basically an alliance formed by big techs like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Visa, Master, and there are several other entities. Their main objective is to bring standards to guide organizations, both banks or otherwise, to passwordless digital journey, passwordless digital experience. So they want to steer people away from, using of password, right? So RSS security token, or the security token, which most of us are aware of, is very popular. Used to be very popular, right? Even today, for enterprise level, if you have to log in from outside your network or business network, a lot of them still use it. However, at a consumer level, it has been a failure. So one of the flagship products that came out of the by using the FIDO standards is the UB key. It's again a physical key. You guys can Google that and you'll be able to find out. I'm sorry, I did not put up that in this presentation. It's something which relies on biometrics and NFC or USB to authenticate an account or authenticate your logins, right? Now, every Facebook employee uses YubiKey. As we speak today, that's the most secure, authenticator that's available on the planet. On the consumer side, I'm talking about. So coming back to the authentication subject, how do we, to understand authentication? Authentication has three common factors that are, involved in the whole process. One is the knowledge factor. Second one is the ownership factor. Third one is the inherence factor. So knowledge factor, anything which is passwords, pins, OTP, security questions, security passphrase are all knowledge factors. Some believe OTP is a ownership factor because the OTP messages land on the mobile devices of the consumers. However, other security experts, including myself, I'm not a security expert, I'm an anti-fraud expert. I believe that OTP is a knowledge factor because that knowledge remains for 1 or 2 minutes. right? So that is still, if it passed to someone, the frauds can still happen. So anything that's visible, anything that people can see is, I consider as a knowledge factor, and that if it gets passed on to someone, frauds can happen. So the second factor is the ownership factor. Any devices, any laptops or electronic devices, watches, electronic watches, security tokens or soft tokens are all ownership factor that people use. So, and the third one is the inherence factor, which is your biometric identifiers. It could be facial recognition, fingerprint, iris recognition, voice, or even behavioral biometrics is the inherence factor. Most of the banks today, or most of the institutions today, they rely on knowledge factor and ownership factor. That is the main problem. So banks have to move away from that. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So what is the way forward that we see? How do we prevent this fraud from a banking perspective? Next slide, Vijay. So someone is asking the question, what is behavioral biometrics? I will address that once we are done with this 1 or 2 slides. So the way forward is to first know your user. It's not difficult to not know your user. Your user is in your infrastructure. They connect to your infrastructure. They download your mobile banking app. They access your website, right? So knowing their digital device IDs or digital imprints or SIM imprints is not difficult today with the available technologies, right? Although I said the banks have to come with the holistic approach of addressing fraud, but until such time, people can still use the silo approach, use combination of 2-3 solutions to put together a library which can be used for protecting your consumers, protecting customers. So knowing your device intelligence and imprint and SIM imprint is highly essential. You have so many hundreds of vendors today who can help provide that. In fact, many companies, many banks, they do capture the information, but it resides somewhere that even the technologist or the IT team or the cybersecurity team and anti-fraud team in the bank, they do not know that it's residing somewhere, because usually they end up buying a solution international product, and the solution by default it has some information. It captures the device details, but it's parked somewhere because banks don't make use of it. So understanding your customer is very, very important. Number 2, go passwordless. Institutions, including enterprises, have to go passwordless. The cost of the cost of resetting password for every organization costs around $150 every time, right? We do not calculate that from, the people involved, the infrastructure involved, the time involved. We do not calculate, most of us do not calculate that it comes as part of the package. However, the cost of password reset for, say, I'm working for a corporate, I have to replace the password, or I misplace the password, or there is a technical error. I call the IT help desk. IT help desk helps me replace the password. It costs $150. It's a huge cost, and it's an unnecessary cost. There are simple solutions to address these problems, and it can be done. Like in the banking particularly, there are ways where people have to move out of knowledge-based authentication both for transaction authentication and, both for customer authentication or device authentication and transaction validation. You purchase something on Flipkart, you purchase something on somewhere else, it goes to Visa 3D secure page or master secure, where again it's OTP. We call it dynamic OTP, but it's an OTP. India will soon see a fraud at a very large scale where the telecom towers will get intercepted. That will make it possible to intercept the communication between a bank and a consumer. Most of the telecom service providers use something called SSS7 protocol, which is a switch which basically gets used in the telecom industry. And that is a few decades old technology. The cost of replacing the technology is huge. So most of the telecom service providers, they do not opt for the new one because it costs them. So some of the syndicates in India have come to realize that it's possible to intercept that. And soon you will see some incidents coming up from India where they intercept this signals and make use of that data, right, to financially benefit from it. So what they do is, it's like setting a passport control, right? So what I do is I gather all the communication that's coming from the telecom company. I reroute it to the customers the way I want. That's what the syndicates do. So in Germany and in Brazil, there were two incidents when one of the largest bank in Germany got impacted. It's a couple of years ago. You can Google, you'll find that out. Some of the largest banks in Germany got impacted for several millions of euros because people were able to intercept the data and reroute it to the consumers. They change the communication. So SMS says, do not, this is your OTP or this is the information. They will reroute it to their requirement so that the customer, the OTP gets intercepted to them. The customer will receive something else. However, they will make use of it. Or they will even send it to the customer, but they, after a few minutes or few seconds so that they can make use of it. This became a huge problem, and the regulators had asked the telecom service provider to fix this problem. And so it took police of several countries, several jurisdictions, including Interpol, to nab these guys. And many believe that not all of the key people behind is still, they're not nabbed. Some of the experiences, these incidents, Carabank incidents and several other incidents are like that. So India is going to see a huge surge in cybercrime because India is going to become the hub of cyber crimes. It will be conducted at the small, medium scale industry level. So the banks and other institutions, they have to start their passwordless journey. And by the time they mature, it will be a few more years. You start the journey now, you mature in 2-3 years time, so that at least you avoid a bigger damage than what it is today. Rely on biometric identifiers, exploit biometric identifiers. Today, as we speak, many Indians, they use smartphones, they use biometric phones. Now, what banks do is they do not leverage fully on that. So wherever you have biometric capability in the phone, use that. Don't have a blanket approach. There is no one size fits all. They have to use a different approach where exploit the device capabilities. Exploit the device capabilities as much as possible. Someone asked me a question just now that what in case biometrics can be compromised? Yes. As cyber security specialist, most of you would know and agree with me. Security is a myth. Whether you call it cyber security or whether it's in life security, it's a myth. COVID-19 has taught us that, right? Nobody is secure. Nothing is secure. But can we live with the belief that nothing is secure and nothing, something is going to happen? No, we have to use ways and means of what we have today, and the immediate future requirements is what matters, right? I cannot put a solution or a technology which is going to address a problem 15 years or 20 years from now. I can address a problem which is currently happening or which is going to happen over the next 5 years. With the amount of knowledge and data or wisdom that we have, we can foresee to some extent. We cannot foresee beyond that. There will be people who has that vision, who can envisage what we don't, but most of us don't. So biometric is definitely compromisable, no doubt about it. At the end of the day, computer understands zeros and ones, binary, right? Whether it's biometric, whether it's pins or passwords, computer understands that. The way I look at biometrics is simple. Today, say you have a Raman Murthy, I beg to differ with you on this. I'm not seeing all the chats, all the messages that get typed in here because I'm using my mobile. So my apologies if I'm missing to respond to someone. I just happen to see Raman Murthy's. OTP is the most vulnerable aspect today, Raman, because of the fraud that we are seeing, not only in India, but globally. And there are some classic examples from Scandinavia, from Norway, from Denmark, from Iceland, from Finland and Sweden, where they use the government database, like Aadhaar database, to validate or authenticate a customer. So the banks and the Aadhaar system, for example, they communicate between each other. So having said that, the Aadhaar system has to be foolproof. They depend largely on biometrics, right? So they do have biometric in Scandinavian countries. So what they do, many banks have their technology makes best use of the library, national library, which has been maintained with the customer biometric identifiers. So every time you log in, it hits the bank database. From there, it hits the country database or the national identity library, and it validates whether it's a customer or someone else. So that's one of the reasons why the frauds are very, 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 very minimal in the Scandinavian countries. Right? Not only that, it's also the mentality of people that also matters a lot. I've been to Norway, for example. I mean, I have been to most of the Scandinavian countries except for Iceland. I've been to Finland, I've been to Sweden, Denmark, Norway. I've been to Norway a couple of times. So in my last visit, I went to Norway. I exchanged currency, Norwegian kroner, because I wanted to use it. I took some currency there. I came back without even spending one physical bill. Everything has been digital there. Every single transaction I made, doesn't matter it's 5 kroner or whether it's 50 kroners, everything is online. You don't need digital currency there. And they're very sophisticated. They're very simple. They're very sophisticated. And I respect their quality of life also, because they, this is out of topic, but they believe spending time for themselves, the personal time and the family time. They value that a lot. And that's one of the reasons why the brains function more effectively than, rest of the world. Why? I'm not trying to, make any judgment here, but most of the Scandinavian countries, there are no exams till, 9th grade or 7th grade. And many schools, they spend most of the time in their, outside the walls, more in the playgrounds, more in the forest area. So that stimulates thought processes. That's what they believe. So coming back, so Scandinavia is the only place where you don't see so many frauds. Otherwise, the frauds are a lot. Like, to give an example, what is the difference between biometrics and OTPs or other mechanism today is, say you have a plug point in your house, right? The plug point, say it's 3 feet from the floor. There's a chance that your child will touch it and there could be a problem. If the plug point is 5 feet from there, there is a chance that your child will not touch until a certain age. There is a, if you put the plug point, at 6 feet or 7 feet, it's not practical for us, but I'm just saying, just trying to give an analogy. So if you put it somewhere above your child, it makes it safer, right? So that's what biometric is all about, in my view, right? The whole world is relying big time on biometrics. Having said that, all it will take is one guy, super smart guy to come and prove us all wrong. That has happened time and again. However, it's safer than OTP. And that's why the European regulators, the UAE regulators, and many other regulators have asked the banks to move away from OTP to safer technologies. Because as the technology is getting popular, fraudsters were able to learn more and more about technology, and so many idle minds, they channel their energy for the wrong purposes, and that's when hacking happens. Today, hacking has never been to such a large scale than what is happening today. Yesterday, UK police, there was an article in BBC where UK police believe they got some information that one of their drone picked up a heat signature in one particular neighborhood, in one particular building. There was a lot of electricity consumption, so they believe that somebody is growing marijuana inside the premises, which is very popular in some of the European countries, where the cannabis or marijuana is not grown in the fields, but grown inside a container, inside a factory kind of environment, right? To not get caught. So when the police raided that, it was a illegal crypto mining setup. And they believe that, many immigrants, many people who are not so sophisticated or also started mining the cryptocurrency. Right? So technology advancement also gives room for good, it's like weapons. You can make good use of it, you can make bad use of it. So today, biometrics is what we have because it's inherent to who you are, right? It's difficult for somebody to steal your thumbprint than stealing something from your mobile or from convincing you to give away your information. So today we have to rely more on biometric identifiers. So behavioral history, the fourth one, the way forward we're talking about behavioral history. Banks have enough and more information with them, which they can make use of it. Like for instance, if I'm an anti-fraud professional working for a particular bank, I will go back and look at the customer history. This device, how many transactions has originated from this device? Look at the false positive ratio, false negative ratio. See, make use of the historic record to tag this as customer's device. I will make use of the data to see if there is any customer complaint available. If not, that data is good enough. So you build a library out of the database and make simple rules, very simple rules that can help you to understand the frauds. A scenario is, say for example, every time there is a static data change, mobile number change from that same device, the chances of frauds are less. If there is mobile number, when I say SIM number change or a device change, or both have changed, these indicators will tell you whether it's the customer, whether it's someone else. As a customer, I might not change the SIM, I might change the device. So the risk is low. As a customer, I might change the SIM, but not the device, so the risk is low. But whenever there is a SIM change and also a device change, the possibility is high. There will be some cases where you upgrade from to to a phone, say for example, where you use mini SIM to micro SIM or nano SIM, micro SIM to nano SIM, there is a possibility that it's a genuine change. However, you need to validate that information. So you build a library first, and every time there is a change, the rule-based parameters has to raise that as a query for banks to, for an analyst or an investigator to look into it and see what next steps can be done to prevent it if there is a possibility of fraud. So banks do not rely largely on this. Most of the institutions, they go on data which is parameters that's available on the rack. They try to use that instead of customizing it to their consumer requirement. Having said that, it has to be well balanced. Too much of customization of any solution is going to give you it's going to be counterproductive. So the customization has to be appropriate and well balanced and smart customization. So you need professionals who understand the fundamentals of frauds, who understand the fundamentals of cybersecurity, who understand the thought processes, who can see the thought process, how frauds happen. You see the best practices globally, you see a trend and a pattern that's emerging from somewhere. You mix a combination of that, make it as a good recipe and put it here to understand the behavioral aspect, and that will help, right? There are behavioral biometrics which are there, which I will, somebody asked a question and I will talk about that also. So behavioral biometrics is something which tries and understands and builds a library of human behavior that can include where all you conduct a transaction, which devices you use, what is the time that you conduct a transaction. If you have a smartphone, whether you are a left-hander or a left-hander, because when we swipe the the screen with a thumb or a finger, there is every customer uses some kind of pressure, and it varies from person to person. It varies when you use two hands to use a device to using one hand to use the device. So the behavioral biometrics, they understand these patterns and they try to build parameters out of it, saying that, okay, this looks like our customer, this doesn't look like our customer. So this has to be alerted for a analyst to review, right? However, it takes considerable amount of time to understand customer behavior, consumer behavior, and then to implement it. Like there are a few companies that I'm familiar with, which Israel-based companies. I was in discussion with them for some aspects of it, and during the discussion, I understood that they use almost some 6,000 parameters, behavioral biometric parameters to use. The solution has been very successful in some parts of the globe, the Western world. However, they have found it increasingly challenging to implement that in India, to an extent that they could not implement even in one bank successfully. They tested somewhere and it did not work because the behavior in the Indian customers is quite different from the behavior of the Western customers. The pattern changes, right? So it requires certain amount of study, it's certain amounts of test environment where you understand and implement. Likewise, if you have a behavioral biometric service provider in India, they will be India-centric, and it will be very difficult to understand how the Western customers behave. So there are pros and cons of using that, both. But yes, biometrics and behavioral biometrics are way forward. Certain behavioral biometrics are extremely essential. The basic ones, for example, what time do you use? What are the locations that you use? What are your thumb impression, the pressure that you use? These are very characteristic to if the banks can implement and study for a couple of months, they will be able to understand it completely. And that can be very positive. That can be used very positively compared to the rest of the 5,000 or 6,000 parameters that are in use, right? So behavioral biometrics is also going to be something which will come up very effective in future in combination with other cybersecurity solutions, right? So the next one is go opt for FIDO compliant solution. So the passwordless journey I'm talking about, you can do a passwordless journey where you don't have to use PIN usernames and password to log in. You can use your solution which are mobile centric, which do not use knowledge factor for authentication. And as we speak, the FIDO compliant solution are highly recommended. Is voice okay for everyone? Okay, I think somebody is having difficulty to hear me out. If you have any concerns, do let me know. Right. So yeah, so there are FIDO compliant solution. You can go to FIDO Alliance online. You will get a lot of very, very informative details there. I as a professional, I find it quite interesting, and I do follow FIDO often. Whatever new things they come up with, I try to keep myself updated on that, and I believe most of us will look forward to it, if not today, but in the near future we will start thinking from a FIDO perspective. And the last thing is awareness. Awareness is highly essential, whether you're making cybersecurity awareness for in your corporation, which could be a non-banking entity, or in the banking entity, right? Let's talk from a banking entity, for example, right? Most of the alerts that we receive from the banks are through SMSs, right? And we cybersecurity professionals, I can tell you, not even half of the messages we read. Most of us will read when there is a transaction alert to see the amount of transaction. And when we do that, we will not even look for which restaurant or which shop has been used, because the restaurant name will be ABC, but it will be 123 Enterprises registered for POS, whatever, right? Most of us will not even do that. Why SMSs has not been effective? As we speak, the world is already exploring 6G technology. We are already experiencing 5G. We live in the 5G world, but customer alert and information, a communication like customer alert, which is highly essential, it goes through 2G communication. Nobody's interested in 2G communication anymore. As long as institutions continue with 2G communication, it's going to be ineffective. Whether you are a bank, whether you are an app, whether you're any other entity, you need to make use of in-app notification as an alternate method for SMS communication, right? In-app notification, there are several advantages to it. One, you can customize the message. The message can pop up instantly instead of going in batches, which usually happens for the telco through telco providers. It goes instantly, number one. Second, the cost is reduced drastically, right? What I understand is, telco operators in India charge around 10 to 20 paise per SMS, depending on the volume that you give them, depending on the contract that you have. But say even it's 20 paise per SMS, every bank sends around few billions of messages every year. Billions, not millions, billions. Me take an example. How many transactions we make in a month? 10 transactions, online transaction. 10 transactions mean 10 SMS alerts for OTP and 10 transaction alerts, which is 20 messages into 12. And 10 is a very minimal number I'm talking about, right? So the cost also goes down significantly. Banks move away from SMSs into in-app notification. The cost reduces, the risk reduces. And it's effective. You can customize. Product promotion message can be in one particular form. The moment it's an alert that the banks have to send it to the customer, it can have some images, some colors, which can show that as an alert or something to be warned about, rather than just like a monotonous, boring 2G messages, which is same if you're going to die, or if it's the same if somebody's trying to sell a candy. It's all the same, right? So they have to move away. Second, the campaigns that you devise for either your employees or your customers, it has to be short and sweet. Nobody has time for boring data anymore. We live in we as human beings, we love entertainment. We love entertainment. The moment you see black and white on one side, and then you see color on the other side, your eyes will go twice on the colored image rather than a black and image. This is the psychologically, it's something scientifically, that's what happens. Human psychology behaves that way. So if your customer does not find it entertaining, the customer will not like it. The customer or employee, if you're trying to create a cybersecurity awareness, it doesn't matter if you even send mails every day to your employees saying that, stop clicking on phishing emails, do not do this, do not do that. Your campaign has to be designed in a very simple way, not more than 3 or 5 do's, not more than 3 or 5 don'ts, if it's an email campaign. And it's best to do video campaigns. It's best to do video campaigns, right? That's something which people will truly enjoy. Short videos, very, very short videos, but animated videos. Why? I'll give you my experience. So in 2018, we did a very successful campaign with Abu Dhabi Police, which I pointed out during the introduction session. UAE had several thousands of fraud cases that were happening, social engineering fraud cases. So we wanted to come with a campaign at a national level, and we did not focus only on our customers. We did for the citizens and residents of the UAE. The campaign was designed from that perspective as a CSR initiative, corporate social responsibility initiative. And just before that, that campaign, while the campaign thoughts were already running and we were planning to do it, I was traveling to Japan. So in Japan, everything is animated. Every message they try to communicate is through animation. And those animations are not long. They're very funny. They're short. They're simple. So I got motivated from those campaigns, and we tried to create small 90 seconds to 60 seconds videos, animated videos with a strong message, but a very funny message, so that people like it, they remember it. So it so happened that a fraud campaign in my previous organization turned out to be the most successful campaign in the history of the organization. No, it received almost 10 million impressions. UAE is a country of 8 million people, right? It received 10 million impressions right after that, when we took the data, and it could have been much more after that, but we just calculate for that particular period. We do the calculation for a particular period from the launch of the campaign. So it turned out to be the most successful event in the bank's history. Why? Because we moved to an animated approach, very short approach, but very simple and very interpretable approach. Ever since, the bank decided to, and we did it along with Abu Dhabi Police, UAE Police, Abu Dhabi CID team was our partners, And that's the police was so impressed with the campaign itself that they started, and that's when they honored us with an award from the Ministry of Interiors. So when we did the campaign, it was on ATMs, it was on, say a customer walks into branches, you have screens there, the screen will talk about some do's and don'ts. There are some employee do's and don'ts, right? So we created the videos. Animated video leaves an impression in your mind. Even today, most of you who have seen Tom and Jerry, who have seen some animation from your childhood, will still remember that. All of us will still remember the small animated song for the, which spoke about the unity in diversity in the small one. Ek chidiya, ek chidiya. I don't know how many of you remember that, but most of us will do what we have seen in our childhood. So awareness have to be effective. Awareness should not be a tick in the checkbox, but the purpose have to be to communicate for the person to be received well. Communication is always about how the person receives. So it's very, very important. I think I'm taking time, perhaps another 5 minutes or something, we'll wind up the presentation, and any questions, if we have time, we can answer, otherwise we'll move later. So I have a case study here, which is about SIM swap fraud, which happened in the UAE market. And, we all know SIM swap, how it happens. So SIM swap, usually it exploits, the fraud exploits the weakness in the two-factor authentication, because most of the banks do a two-factor authentication either through an OTP or through a call to the registered mobile numbers. So what fraudsters do is they impersonate the victim, approach the telecom operator for replacement of the SIM or porting of the SIM. Sometimes they present a falsified document, sometimes they just bribe the staff there to port the SIM. And they also try and social engineer the data from bank staff or bribe the bank staff into getting some small information. In some of the cases, we have even seen, some of the security questions banks, what are the security questions banks ask you when you call the call center? What's your date of birth? What's your mother's maiden name? Where did you open the branch? What was your last transaction? These are very simple questions. So to answer about the last transaction, we have even seen fraudsters depositing a small amount of money on the customer's account and to answer the question, right? So once they, get hold of the new SIM, they call the contact center, which is the registered mobile number, and then reset the, internet banking or mobile banking credentials, and they start transferring the money to the mule accounts or to the, or they just withdraw it. Right, withdraw it from the other banks, not from the victim's bank, beneficiary banks. So this was becoming a problem. The UAE market witnessed a loss of around 400 million dirhams for SIM swap. It was one of the most sophisticated frauds that I have seen in my lifetime. Why I'm saying so? We arrested almost some 25 criminals who were involved in the syndicate, but we could not reach it to the top pyramid. And we were in a position to reach some members of the top pyramid, but that means risking ourselves personally to do so, which, the management were not convinced for us to do so. We worked with Abu Dhabi CID, Dubai CID, we raided some houses. It's a SIM swap fraud. Somebody asked me a question, what fraud it is. I think it's SIM swap fraud. So we raided some properties. We waited for people. We tracked their people, their family members in UK. Surprisingly, in the UAE market, there is a lot of reliance on Indians. The moment there are 195 nationalities who live in the UAE. And Indian nationality is one of the nationalities which people trust the most, right? This particular fraud was conducted by Indians, particularly from people from a district called Kasaragod in Kerala. and they used forged Indian passports to falsify, to impersonate other people. So it was a challenge. It was a big challenge. We didn't know how to address it. So there were several questions that came up. What technology can we implement to stop this fraud? Somebody came with voice biometrics. Somebody came with biometrics, which means we need to. At that point of time, it was around 4 or 5 million dirhams to buy a technology, and to implement the technology, meaning you have to gather the database of 1 million customers, voice of 1 million customers to implement that. That means another year and a half or two to implement the solution. It's a humongous toss. So we said, okay, how do we stop this and not wait for this long? So we said, okay, we went to the fundamentals of this fraud, how the fraud could happen. The fraud can happen only when the fraudsters have your SIM, right? And we cannot control what telco operator do. And second is some information from the bank, right? So we said, what is that one information which customer will have, the bank will not have, or a telco company will not have, right? So we came across two data sets. One is the ATM PIN, and second one is the CVV number. So what we decided was CVV number, many people see CVV number. You go to a petrol station, if you don't have tap and pay, if you give the card to someone or give a card in the restaurant, people can still see your CVV number, right? The ATM PIN is something which is very privy to only through the customer or not to anybody else. And SIM swap fraud, people do not have the physical card or PIN. So what we did was we changed the process in the IVR that we mandated the use of ATM PIN. Customers had to type the ATM PIN on the keypad in the IVR to reset or register for digital banking. A simple process change, which costed us, 50,000-60,000 dirhams. And within a month and a half, the fraud stopped completely. As we speak, last 6 years, that bank, I moved away from the bank now, 6 years till date, there are no such frauds that have happened in that, after this change. So why I'm bringing this as a case study is it's a very, very interesting one. Today, globally, everybody is talking about SIM swap fraud. Everybody is talking about, SIM swap is, according to UK and the US, it's one of the biggest threats. You go to FBI website, you will see that as one of the biggest threats. You go to National Crime Bureau of UK, you will see that. In Europol, you will see that. But simple process change, we were able to control that. Now, people can say, so people can, there are debates where people say, people, if they can do social engineering, they can get your PIN also. Yes, they can get your PIN. No doubt about it. However, not everybody is a master of all trades. We are master of one trade. We master in only one area. We are professionals. You could be a cybersecurity expert, right? From outside, for an outside person, he will say, oh, he's a technology guy. In technology, you can, make 10,000 different technology professions within the technology domain itself, right? Similarly, fraudsters are also master of one. They're not they're jack of all trades, but not the master of all trades. So person who's doing a SIM swap fraud, 95 to 99% of the time, they do not do another kind of fraud because the return on investment do not help them. They look from return on investment perspective. So they social engineer the bank staff. They don't social engineer the customer. You may find one case or two cases where you will see a combination. However, 99% or 99.5% of the times you don't. To an extent that this bank where I work, last 6 years, there are no frauds. Now, what I did, I'm a member of UAE Fraud Forum. So I went and shared this process change 6 years ago to other fraud heads in the region. Initially, people did not believe. Why? Because today, the moment you talk about solution, we look for sophistication. Or, like our life, the moment, everything is sophistication. But The answer is most of the time lies in the fundamentals. The fraud has changed from, somebody stealing to a digital fraud. However, the fundamentals of fraud has not changed, right? So the answer to any security problem that you would see today in the market, you can go back and dig in on the fundamentals. You will find the solution there. In my company, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be an anti-fraud professional, and I started my master's in criminal psychology, and I wanted to retire as a professor. But why I created my company is that as a practitioner, I could see that banks and customers are struggling to cope up with this fraud. There were no solutions to it. So I thought, okay, why not create a solution? So I started researching more and more on this, and that's how we are building a solution that will address most of the knowledge-based cyber frauds. And that's what we are trying to do. And we went for the fundamentals. So as cybersecurity experts, look for fundamentals. You'll find the answers rather than looking for the sophisticated technology. Sophistication is good, but still fundamentals are very, very important. So when I shared this information with other banks, initially other banks did not believe because they found it very simple. And there were some debates like, okay, what in case they, social engineering the customers? However, the counter argument for me was, it's better than what you have today. So to an extent that after 2 years, when we had another fraud forum meeting in the UAE, that point of time, the largest bank in UAE, they ended up implementing the recommendation that I had given. Until date, they are using the same recommendation and they do not have the fraud. So the difference was they ended up losing 6 times more than what they could have prevented when initially this topic came up for discussion. And another one of the 5th largest bank in the UAE, they also implemented the recommendation that has been given. Till there, they're using the same. So this case study, I find it very interesting because not from what we could achieve, but to make you all think that when the world is struggling with some cyber crimes, some frauds, the advantage of working in India is it helps you to brainstorm. It helps you because we have seen I worked in Hyderabad market for 3.5 years, and I've seen some extraordinary incidents. I ended up confronting some people who belong to the underworld at that point of time. Vijay, I don't know if you remember this.
Yes.
They kind of put a gun on us at that point of time. So yes, the gentleman is no more. I can't call it as a gentleman. His name was Paritala Ravi. So the rich experience, the foundation that India gave me, helped me to think differently and to address a global problem with a very, very simple approach. And that's the message, we all have to take from this session, that look for fundamentals. Look at the fundamentals, you will find a solution. Right. So the last slide is just nothing. I gave you some real life events. Next slide, Vijay. Real life events on, different incidents that happen across the globe, include, whaling attack and phishing. I think in the interest of time, we have to move to questions and answer session. If there is, there are some animations for you all just to keep the mood light. We have been having a very serious discussion about frauds for this long. So, I like this one. Last Christmas, I gave you my heart, my bank codes, and online secure identity. Right. So that's the world we are living in today. That data piracy is the biggest threat, and whoever holds the data holds the oil. Like oil is the new data is the new oil. That's what we say. So any questions?